Scrambled Eggs Super by Dr. Seuss. I don't like to brag and I don't like to boast, said Peter T. Hooper. But speaking of toast and speaking of kitchens and ketchup and cake and kettles and stoves and the stuff people bake, well, I don't like to brag, but I'm telling you, Liz, that speaking of cooks, I'm the best that there is. Why only last Tuesday when mother was out, I really cooked something worth talking about. You see, I was sitting here resting my legs and I happened to pick up a couple of eggs and I sort of got thinking it sort of a shame that scrambled eggs always taste always the same. And that's because ever since goodness knows when they've always been made from the eggs of a Ben. Just a plain common hen, what a dumb thing to use with all of the other fine eggs you could choose. And so I decided that just for a change, I'd scrambled a new kind of egg on the range. Some fine fancy eggs that no other cook cooks, like the eggs of the ruffle-necked Salamagox. A Salamagox say they should be good, so I went out and I found some as quick as I could. And while I was lugging them back to the house, I happened to notice a chisel-topped grouse in a house tree that in a high street down the street, and I knew from her looks that her eggs and the eggs of Salamagooks out to mix mightily well, out to taste simply super when scrambled together by Peter T. Hooper. So I took those eggs home and I fizzled them up. And I added some sugar, 2/3 of a cup, and a small pinch of pepper, and also a pound of horseradish sauce that was sitting around, and also some nuts that I tasted the stuff, and it tasted quite fine, but not quite fine enough. To make the best scramble that ever been made, a cook has to hook the best eggs ever laid. So I drove to the country quite rather far out, and I studied the birds that were flitting about. I looked with great care at a mop noodle finch. I looked at a beagle beaked bald-headed grinch. Also, and also I looked at a shade roosting quail who was roosting right under a lax tail, and I looked at a spritz and a flannel wig jay. But I just didn't stop. I kept right on my way, 'cause they didn't have those eggs. They were laying that day. Then suddenly, boy, up that hill a short space, birds. They were laying all over the place. Great happy gay families with uncles and cousins all laying fine, strictly fresh eggs by the dozens. Why, I'd have scrambled more than super. Scrambled eggs, super duper de booper, special de luxe a la Peter T. Hooper. I picked out the eggs in a most careful way. I only picked those that I knew were grade A. I only took eggs from the best fowls, so I didn't take eggs from the Twinders owl, 'cause I knew that the eggs of those fellows who twiddle taste sort of like dust from inside a bass fiddle. I wait for the kind that were mellow and sweet, and the world's sweetest eggs are the eggs of the queet, which is due to those very sweet throat which they eat, and those and wogs, after all, are the world's sweetest frogs, and the reasons they're sweet, it's whenever they lunch. It always, it's always the world's sweetest bees that they munch, and the reason no bees can be sweeter than these, and the reason they only eat blossoms of bezel nut trees, and these bezelnuts blossoms are sweeter than sweet, and that's why I na- na- named several eggs from the queen. But I passed up the eggs of a bird called a strudel, who's sort of a stork, but with fur like a poodle. For they say that the eggs of kind of stork are gooey like glue, and they stick to your fork. And the yolks of these eggs, I am told, taste like fleece, while the white tastes like very old bicycle grease. The places I hiked to, the roads that I rambled to find the best eggs that have been ever been scrambled. I hunted new birds along wild, tangled trails, throughout gullies and gulches, down dinglings and dales. I wiggled my way and I crawled at a creep through a forest of ferns that was 40 miles deep, and I mushed through the brush till I found a fine quigger. Those eggs are as big as a pinhead, no bigger. Then I went for the eggs of a long-legged quong. Now these quong, well, she's built just a little bit wrong, for her legs are so terribly, terribly long that she has to lay eggs 20 feet in the air, and they drop with a plop to the ground from up there. So unless you can catch them before the eggs crash, you haven't got eggs. You've got long legger hash. Eggs. I collected 302, but I needed still more, and I suddenly knew that the job was too big for one fellow to do. So I telegraphed north to some friends near Fazo, which is 10 miles or so just beyond the North Pole, and they are some jumped in their Katamar side, which is sort of a boat made of sea leopard's hide, which they sailed out to sea to go looking for grise, which is sort of a bird with which lays eggs on the ice, which they grabbed with a tool which is known as a squish, cause those eggs are too cold to be touched without which. And while they were sending those eggs, I got word of a bird that does something that's almost unheard of. It's hard to believe, but this bird is called the pelf. Lays eggs that are 3 times as big as herself. How that the pelf ever learned how such a difficult trick, I never found out, but I found that egg real quick, and I managed to get it down out of the nest, and I hoped home to the kitchen along with the rest. But I didn't stop them because I knew of some ducks by the name of the single file Zoomingsin Zooks, who stroll single file through the mountains of Zooms, quite oddly enough, with their eggs on their thumbs, and some fellows in Zooms whose whom I happen to know just happened to capture 1,000 or so, and they wrapped up their eggs and they mailed them by air, marked specially delivered, handled with care. I needed more helpers, and so for us assistants, I called up a fellow named Ali, long distance, and Ali, as soon as he hung up the phone, picked up a small basket and started alone to climb the steep crags and the jags of Mountain Struku to fetch me the egg of a mountain struku cuckoo. No, now these mountain struku cuckoos are rather small gals. But But these mountain strucus have lots of big piles. They divide from the skids with wild crackling shrieks, and they jabbed at his legs and they stabbed at his cheeks with their yammering, clamoring, hammering beaks. But Ali, brave Ali, he fought his way through, and he sent me the eggs as I knew he would do. For my scrambled eggs, super D duper D booper special deluxe a la Peter T. Hooper. In the meanwhile, of course, I was keeping real busy collecting the eggs of the three eyelash tizzy. They're quite had hard to reach, so I rode on the top of a hammock. Shinim Ika Shinimika Shinop. Then I found a great flock of southwest facing cranes, and I guess they've got something that's wrong with their brains. For this kind of crane, when she's guarding her nest, will always stand facing precisely southwest. So to keep get at her eggs wasn't hard to in the least. I came from behind from previously northeast, and I captured the egg of a grickly gractus who's laid him up high in prickly cactus. Then I went for some zifs. They're exactly like zufs, but the zifs live on cliffs, and the zufs live on bluffs. And seeing how bluffs are exactly like cliffs, it's mighty hard to tell zufs from the zifs. But I know that the egg and I got from the bluffs, if it wasn't a zifs from the cliffs, was a zufs. Now I need an egg of a moth watching sneth, who's a bird who's so big she scares people to death. And this awful big bird, well, the reason they name her the moth watching sneth is 'cause that's how they tame her. She likes watching moths, sort of quite her mind. And while she is watching, you sneak up behind and you yank out her egg. So I got one, of course, with the help of some friends and a very last horse. If you want to get eggs, you can't buy at a store. You have to go do things never thought of before. Why? To get the eggs of one very small doff, he had to pray all of the one mountain top off. Then I heard some of the birds who lay eggs, if you please, that tasted like the air in the holes in the Swiss cheese, and they live in the big Zanzibar trees. So I ordered a tree full. The job was immense, but I needed those eggs and said hang those the expense. I still need one more, and I saved it from the last. The egg of the frightful bombastic agst, and that bird is so mean, and that bird is so fast that I had to escape on a Jill Eka jazz, a flutered beast who can run like a deer, but looks sort of different. You steer him by ear. Although with the searching, although with the looking, I had all I needed. And now for the cooking. I rushed to the kitchen, the place where I'd stack him. I rolled up my sleeves, I unpacked him and cracked them and shunked him and crunked them in 99 pans. Then I mixed them in some beans. I used 55 cans. Then I mixed in some ginger, 9 prunes, and 3 figs, and parsley quite sparsely, just 22 sprigs. And then I added 6 cinnamon sticks and a clove, and my scramble was ready to go on the stove. And you know how they tasted. They tasted just like, well, they tasted exactly just like scrambled eggs. Super D duper D booper special deluxe a la Peter T Hooper. The end.